good boy. Oh, what a good dog you are. He has the most beautiful blue eyes. I probably should have named him Paul after Paul Newman or Frank after Frank Sinatra. He has been licensed as an emotional therapy dog. He helps me when I talk about my sister. He will put one paw here and one paw here and let me just cry on his shoulder. I've told this story so many times. It never seems to get easier. I was in 8th grade at Eastmore Junior High School, and Lori was a sophomore. I was 13, she was 15. I'm the bratty little sister. It was a Friday night. Everybody went to the football game. Lori went to a couple people's parties after the football game. She was supposed to spend the night with one of her friends.
By 11 the next morning, Lori still hasn't come home.
Lori Nelson's mother started to make some phone calls to friends to see if anybody had seen Lori or if she had spent the night somewhere.
They said no. The last that they had heard is Lori was just going to go home. She's going to walk home. It was 1974. We walked places.
And then she contacted the Columbus Police Department to file a missing persons report.
My mother was scared to death, but she would not portray that to me because she did not want to scare me.
Tony and Lori's mother, Joyce, is raising her 2 girls on her own.
My parents divorced. I'm not sure what year. I was really little. I want to say maybe 5.
Lori didn't let her parents' divorce stand in her way. She was focused and determined from a young age.
She was a kid, but she was so ahead of her time. She was a volunteer on McGovern's campaign in 1972.
I just want to warn the American people just as clearly as I can, don't buy this Nixon line.
So she would have been 12. I mean, wrap your head around that. 12 years old and is volunteering to work on a presidential campaign. She was off the charts smart, and she was extremely active in Israeli rights. My family is Jewish. She was so deep and so sensitive and so wanted to be a voice for anybody that didn't have one. Lori would never disappear. She might come home a little late, but never, ever would she disappear.
Lori had been missing for just a few hours when a call comes in to a police department in a nearby town.
A husband and wife were hunting for hedge apples, and they see deceased young female laying in a ditch.
Detectives responded, and they document that it's a white female in her late teens.
She had no clothes on. She did have what appeared to be some bruising on her left arm. It was not obvious to them what had caused the death of this young woman.
They don't see any telltale sign like a rope around the neck or a gunshot wound or anything like that. And then they examine the bottom of her feet, which appear to be, for the most part, clean.
It led the investigators after the fact to believe that whatever happened to the young woman happened somewhere else, and then she was left there on Rose Hill Road.
The coroner takes the Jane Doe's body to the morgue. The story hits the local news that night.
A friend of Lori's called the police department and notified them that a friend of his matched the description of the young woman that was found in Reynoldsburg, deceased.
Police asked Joyce Nesson to come to the morgue to identify her daughter's body.
She said, "I need to talk to you about Lori." And I looked at her and I said, "Oh, well, what about her?" And she said, "She's not coming home. She's gone. She died." I didn't understand. One minute she was there, the next minute she was gone.
The autopsy was conducted the next day. It was determined that she did have some kind of sexual relation with somebody, but it was not ruled that she was raped. And the manner of death was not ruled homicide. They just weren't able to determine what that reason was.
It's possible that she had a drug overdose or she died of some other cause and was taken there by someone who panicked and dumped them. The toxicology report is still pending, and so they continue to investigate this as a suspicious death. So the investigators, they do just a number of different interviews with fellow friends, students, parents, just about anybody who had contact with her through the football game or any of these after parties.
Lori was last seen by a friend leaving the party at about 10 after midnight. And then again, within a few minutes after that, two more friends that had me driving by saw Lori walking.
Lori lives just a few minutes' walk away from the party she'd gone to. Lori's body was found miles away from her home. Investigators believe she'd accepted a ride from someone.
Everybody was very adamant about Lori would not get into a car with a stranger. No way, okay? So the police said that she got into a car with someone she knew.
In my experience, people are killed by, more often than not, by people that they know.
This nice little Jewish group of kids now started looking at each other like, well, who did she get in the car with? We've never talked about Lori, ever. It was too painful for my mom. I truly 100% believe that if Lori would have been an only child, I do not believe my mom would have survived it. She had me, so she still had to go on.
Lori's murder dominates the local news, and that leads to tips. One of those tips stands out above the rest.
They receive a call from a woman named Donna Upp, who worked at Mount Carmel East Hospital and had been on her way to work at around 5:45 in the morning. And she says, I recall seeing a girl dressed in similar clothing to what Lori Nesson was wearing when she went missing.
She also reports that she saw a small red-colored car that was pulled off in a lane that to locals was called Lover's Lane. So they did focus on people that had access to their red car.
Scott Richards drove a red Mustang. Lori and Scott were like super, super close, like best friends. And he lived on the same street as us.
Scott Richards was around 16. He hosted the after party at his parents' house that she first went to after the football game.
He was in her circle of friends and acquaintances. But her friends said he was strange and we think he could do something like that. It wasn't just like one person, and the more information you get on somebody and the more people are telling you the same thing, that information carries more weight than others. So police acted on that. They went and interviewed Scott Richards as the suspect.
He's able, through his parents and himself, to account for his whereabouts and the time frame from the after party to when she's found dead. So even though there may be some lingering doubts, there's no Ring door camera video and there's no cell phone GPSing, so they can't even really go out and verify someone's story. They have to take it at face value.
Reynoldsburg police actually got a phone call that somebody had found shoes on the side of the road in Gahanna, which is a neighboring suburb. And then another report came in that this sweater and the jeans were found. The clothing was located approximately 3 miles from where Lori's body was found.
Lori's clothes and shoes are strewn along the right side of the road.
It would be logical to draw the idea that there were perhaps 2 people in the car when that clothing was thrown out. Someone's driving and then someone's in the passenger side from where the clothing went out the window.
Earlier in investigation, the investigators came across information that Lori's mom had filed a report back in August of 1973.
According to the report, Lori, who was 14 at the time, was leaving school when a man tried to lure her into his car. She escaped, ran home, and told her mother what happened.
An officer puts 2 and 2 together and says, I think I know who this is, because this is somebody that they had dealt with. His name was Eugene Gouet. He was known to operate in that area on the east side of Columbus, and he would try and lure girls into his car.
Mr. Gouet was followed to a bar where it was noted that Mr. Gouet had what looked like to be maybe like an infected laceration on his head or his face, and that he could have been injured in a struggle if Lori was fighting for her life.
And they decide, hey, we should probably talk to this guy. He's very non-committal on his whereabouts around the time frame of the crime, nothing that they're able to confirm. He doesn't have an alibi. They actually have a photograph of her, and they show it to him. Not only does he recognize her, he makes a comment about, yeah, I didn't like her because she had braces. And so that raises some of the red flags for the investigators that this is somebody that we should really zero in on.
Eugene Guay absolutely denied being involved with Lori's death. They offered him a polygraph, and he agreed to that.
The investigators received a phone message from the attorney that now represents Eugene Guay, who says that he will not be taking the polygraph. They do get permission via consent to search his vehicle in the hopes that they might find something that would link Eugene Guay to Lori Nesson, and they don't come up with any evidence. Once he retains an attorney, there really isn't anything left for them to do.
The toxicology results came back from Lori's autopsy, and there was no drugs or no alcohol in her blood.
Once they receive the final coroner's report, it's not ruled as a homicide. It's ruled as a accidental death from unknown origin. There's more questions than answers.
You didn't have to be some kind of brain to look at the circumstances surrounding her death and where her clothes were and where her body was in relation to where we lived. How anybody could rule that as anything but a homicide is beyond me.
The accidental death ruling means the end of the investigation. Lori's case goes as cold as Ohio's icy winter winds. Her family tries to pick up the pieces. Joyce wants to make sure Tony can lead a normal life.
My mom made me go back to school. She got me involved in riding horses. I played sports and got good grades and a boyfriend. My mom was always a very, very vivacious person that loved to entertain, loved to go to parties, loved to dance, and then it all stopped. She went to work and she came home. There was always something missing, and it was Lori. I always wondered who took my sister from me. At some point, there's got to be some kind of answer somewhere, but I didn't know where to go or how to get it.
I came across the case August of 2019 while looking through the file room. It's what piqued my curiosity is the death certificate did not list a manner of death as homicide. It was listed as undetermined.
Though he's not a detective, Patrol Officer Craig Bradford spends his free time re-examining local cold cases.
When Lori went missing, she was the same age as my daughter was. She was 15 years old. And I couldn't imagine going through the next 46 years with no answers.
Officer Bradford gets permission from the deputy chief to investigate the case on his own time. He gathers the case files and pores over the autopsy photos.
There were some injuries that were not listed. Some trauma may have been behind a left ear, but my aha moment was there was one photograph in particular of a detective that lifted up Lori's upper lip, and there was a lot of damage, which was consistent with possibly being rubbed against the top braces that Lori had. So someone could have been mashing her mouth down to try to keep her quiet. This was a clear clear, obvious homicide.
I never thought it would be solved because how could it be? It wasn't even ruled a homicide. All those years, nobody ever cared about what happened to her until Craig Bradford.
I contacted Tony. I felt she deserved answers. Her family deserved answers. And I felt that we had an opportunity now to do this, to do it right.
He said, well, I don't want to reopen an old wound, but I would like to talk to you about your sister. And literally, the minute he said that, it was like somebody punched me in the stomach. So the first thing that I said to Craig when I finally could catch my breath was, you can't reopen something that was never closed.
Before Bradford can move forward, he has to convince the coroner that Lori's death wasn't accidental and that she was murdered.
The county coroner and some of the other physicians would have to sit down and review all the aspects of the case before the elected coroner would sign off on it.
In September of 2020, after 5 months of deliberation, the coroner's office comes back with a decision.
The manner of death had been overturned from undetermined to homicidal violence.
Craig got her case reopened, and for the first time in 45 years, I felt that somebody actually cared about Lori. And so it was extremely emotional for me. And I mean, just look at can you see my hand? Just thinking about that.
That was extremely satisfying, but we still had an uphill battle on our hands because we still had an investigation to conduct. The two main people that had been looked at the time, Eugene Guay and a friend of Lori's, Scott Richard, had both passed away several years ago.
Detectives hope new forensic technology will give them a solid lead. They submit Lori's clothing to the crime lab for DNA testing.
Unfortunately, this case came in right before the start of the COVID pandemic, and that did slow progress. Like most of the country, we were working from home and definitely can't do DNA analysis from my house.
Suspects from 1975 have died. That, combined with the global pandemic, slows the case to a crawl.
Here it is November, and I got nothing. And that's when I called Lieutenant Early, and I said, I'm going to the media. Somebody somewhere knows something, and we need to find that person.
Tony was very adamant about the fact that she wanted to run a news story on it. So one of our local reporters from a news channel here was willing to do that.
I get a phone call from my cousin, Jean. She says, have you seen this story on TV about Lori Neeson? I said, no, I haven't. And she said, well, this sounds just like Karen. So she called the police department.
17-year-old Karen Adams had been murdered just 6 months after Lori, back in 1975.
And if you were to draw a straight line between the locations of both of those victims, it's probably only 2.5 miles at best. We felt very strongly that there might be a connection between these two crimes.
A detective from the Reynoldsburg Police Department contacted me in reference to a cold case homicide that I solved back in 2011. It was the Karen Adams case.
At the time of her murder, Karen Adams lived just 10 minutes from Lori Nesson. The night she was killed, 17-year-old Karen told her parents she was going out for about an hour. She drove off and never came back.
She said she was going to see a friend about a scarf that she'd left over there and was going to go get it. She'd be right back. 11 o'clock turned around and we knew something was going on then. Karen was never out late at night. The next morning, Karen was reported missing. I was driving around, talking with her friends, trying to find my sister. I found her car in a parking lot. I knew something was wrong. She would have never left that car. Never.
Just a few months earlier, Karen finally saved enough from waitressing to buy the 1965 Mercury Comet, her first car.
I'd worked on it a little bit, fixed it up a little bit for her, and I remember her taking me for a ride and how happy she was to have that car. That's the only memory that I kind of keep. Me and her riding around that car. Karen was the third of 5 children. 4 girls, 1 boy. I'm the oldest. She's special to our family. Had a great sense of humor. She was looking so much forward to her future.
It was roughly 6 to 8 miles east of Whitehall where Karen lived. 2 people just happened to look in the ditch and saw a body.
We got the call from the police. They'd found her body. It's like somebody just pulled my guts out of me. All I could think of was how Karen's last few moments were.
She had some marks on her neck, and once they took her from the scene and did the autopsy, obviously that was confirmed that 1, she was sexually assaulted, and 2, that she was strangled to death. There were no witnesses or fingerprints. Detectives followed as many leads as they could. They spent a good 6 months to a year on it. They interviewed everyone they could and ran out of leads.
The family was, hey, what are you people doing? I asked to see the file on Karen. They wouldn't show it to me. I just couldn't get any answers. I tried bribing people. That didn't help. And then it got colder and colder and colder, and pretty soon everybody forgets.
Cold case detective Chuck Clark is searching the database for an inactive case to take on when he finds Karen Adams' file.
Her case seemed to have one of the highest probabilities of being solved, mainly because DNA had come around.
A 2010 forensic test on Karen's clothes reveals the DNA profiles of 2 unknown males.
They put them in CODIS, which is the system that identifies suspects. One came back as unknown, and one was a known male that had done time in prison for rape and kidnapping, and his name was Robert Meyer.
Meyer had been arrested and convicted for raping and kidnapping 2 women in Toledo, Ohio in 1976, just a year after Karen Adams' murder. He spent 25 years in prison and was released in 2001.
When he was released, he was required to provide a DNA sample because of his conviction.
We just needed to get a DNA swab from him to verify the hit that I got in CODIS from the lab. We knocked on his door. Mr. Meyer was very cordial, very polite, and he was very compliant. So I got DNA swabs from each cheek and took those swabs right to the lab to be compared.
Detectives showed up my door. They said they had a DNA hit with CODIS. And as soon as they get the evidence confirmed, they were going to arrest him. It all came back like a flood. That same feeling that I got when I found out that Karen had got killed, I got again. They never told me the name. What they told me was it was a 71-year-old convicted rapist that was living in Cincinnati. Well, all you have to do is go to the Hamilton County sex offender website and figure out, how many 71-year-old guys you got there. One. I got an address off the website. I went down to see him. I took my gun. And I knocked on his door. I kept thinking about my sister's last moments and how bad I wanted to hurt Robert Meyer. I had the gun in my pocket. He opened the door. What do you want? Inside my head was ringing like I was going to blow up. I stood within 2 feet of him, and I didn't see his face. I seen my mother's face. I just couldn't do it. He doesn't deserve that much attention. There's no way I could kill that man and put my mother through more heartache over this. I just turned around and walked away.
As soon as we got the confirmation DNA, I had Mr. Myers transported to the Cincinnati Police Department Detective Bureau, where I conducted an interview.
Did you know of a female by the name of Karen Adams? Does that ring a bell with you at all or anything?
Mm-mm.
Karen Adams?
Sure don't.
I got the feeling that he actually didn't remember. I think it would have been possible. Who knows how many other crimes he committed against women.
How could you explain to me that I have DNA evidence that you sexually assaulted this girl that I'm speaking with you in reference to?
I have no idea.
They arrested him. He pleads guilty to murder. He was convicted, sentenced, 25 years in life. He died 4 years later.
Myers' arrest and death bring some closure to the case. But the identity of Karen's other attacker is still a mystery.
I discovered that he had an accomplice in Toledo. That person's name was Charles Weber.
Robert Meyer and Charles Weber actually met in prison back in the early to mid 1960s. They lived together as soon as they get out of prison, and one of them's out of prison not 2 weeks, and we have Lori Nesson show up dead. Around 6 months later, we have Karen Adams, who is found dead. And then Weber and Meyer actually moved to Toledo, Ohio, and they attempted twice more to abduct, sexually assault, and murder 2 more victims. Charles Weber went to prison until 1989, and he was released, and he died 3 years later, so we didn't have the opportunity to get his DNA.
4 years later, in March of 2016, Detective Clark tracks down Charles Weber's biological son and, using familial DNA, confirms Weber was the second suspect in Karen Adams' murder.
It is such a relief to find out who did this and move on with your life and keep the memories of what you had that were good and let the rest of it go. But that is the hardest thing to do.
We received calls with people saying the news story about the death of Lori Nesson, and it sounded very similar to the death of Karen Adams. I contacted Devania Herdman at the DNA lab. She was actually familiar with the Karen Adams case because she had done the DNA analysis on it.
So I started comparing Karen's profile from her underwear to the profile from Lori's jeans. They were identical. And not only did we get one foreign individual, but the same 2 foreign individuals that did this to Lori. I screamed. I screamed at my desk.
The DNA match and the stories from Weber and Myers' surviving victims lead to a theory about what happened the night Lori Nesson was murdered.
The women in Toledo said that they tried to approach them under the guise of needing help. And then once they got close to the car, they jump out and would grab them.
I think they forced her into the vehicle. They sexually assaulted her and then decided that killing her was the best way of concealing their crime.
Convinced that Weber and Myers killed Lori, investigators finally have answers for Lori's sister, Toni.
Once Craig told me that Lori's case had been solved and they're both dead, I think I did ask, is there any way that we could exhume their bodies so that I could run over them with my truck multiple times? I'm very upset that they never had to pay for what they did to my sister. But I can't spend the rest of my life being concerned with them. So what we did on July 13th, which was my 60th birthday, we did a very small memorial service At the graveside, my mom is buried next to Lori, and I got to tell them both that Lori's case was solved and that they could rest in peace.
Me and Tony Hessen has become very good friends over this. We'll always be in this together. And we talk quite often about the need to do shows like this, to get the word out. Law enforcement and the families all believe that there are other victims out there. We're sure of that. If you know of anybody that sounds like this story, contact your local authorities.
I want to make sure that these families out there and friends don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. There's always some sort of hope. And if my story can help another family, then all of the pain that I've been through is worth it.
There is a fundamental promise embedded within the very foundation of modern society, a silent pact we all enter into the moment we are born. We surrender a portion of our absolute freedom to the state, and in return, the state guarantees our safety. We build complex legal frameworks, establish grand courthouses with towering pillars, and empower individuals with the authority to wear black robes and wield heavy wooden gavels. We create these vast, intricate systems of justice to ensure that when the darkest elements of human nature surface, there is a mechanism in place to protect the innocent. We need to believe that when a predator reveals their true face, the system will recognize the threat, remove them from our communities, and lock them away behind thick concrete and cold steel. This belief is not just a comfort. It is the absolute necessity that allows us to sleep at night, to let our children play outside, to walk down a quiet street without constantly looking over our shoulders. We trust the finality of a judge's sentence. We trust that a monster, once caught and condemned, will never again be allowed to walk among us. But history is etched with profound tragedies that occur when this sacred promise is broken. What happens when the system designed to protect us becomes the very instrument that enables our destruction? What occurs when the rigid walls of justice develop microscopic cracks, born of bureaucratic oversight, legal technicalities, and administrative failures? The story we are about to explore is not merely a recounting of horrific violence, although the violence is indeed unfathomable. It is fundamentally a chronicle of a catastrophic systemic collapse. It is a terrifying examination of how a series of seemingly distant legal decisions and administrative compromises can cascade into a nightmare of unimaginable proportions, paid for with the lives of the innocent. To understand this tragedy, we must journey deep into the heart of Texas. The landscape of Texas is vast and uncompromising, a sweeping expanse of geography that holds both breathtaking beauty and profound isolation. In the mid-20th century, communities like Rosebud and Waco were places where generations of families grew up together, where everyone knew their neighbors, and where the concept of violent, predatory crime felt like something that only happened in distant, chaotic cities. The skies stretched endlessly, the fields hummed with the quiet rhythm of rural life, and a sense of pervasive safety settled over the small towns as the sun went down. But beneath this tranquil surface, a shadow was waiting to emerge, a shadow that would eventually cast a permanent, chilling pall over the entire state. The architect of this darkness was a man named Kenneth Allen McDuff. In the annals of true crime, his name evokes a specific, visceral dread. He would eventually become known by a moniker that sends shivers down the spine of anyone familiar with his deeds, the Broomstick Killer. However, long before the terrifying nickname and the widespread panic, he was simply a deeply dangerous individual walking the streets of a trusting society. The unprecedented nature of his criminal career is starkly summarized by a single, chilling fact. He remains the only person in the extensive dark history of the Texas judicial system to be sentenced to death on two entirely separate occasions for completely different waves of murder committed in two distinct eras of his life. This singular, grim milestone is not a testament to the efficiency of the justice system, but rather a glaring, bloody monument to its most fatal failure. Our narrative begins in the year 1966, in the quiet town of Rosebud, Texas. It was an era characterized by a different kind of innocence, a time before the widespread awareness of serial predators and random, senseless violence. The teenagers of Rosebud lived lives typical of the era, filled with youthful optimism, evening drives, and a fundamental trust in the world around them. But this trust was brutally shattered in a single night of unimaginable terror. Kenneth Allen McDuff, accompanied by an accomplice, descended upon three innocent teenagers. The sheer brutality of what transpired next defies basic human comprehension. The victims, caught entirely off guard, were forced into a waking nightmare. The young woman was subjected to horrific sexual violence, an act of sheer domination and cruelty. The two young men, her companions, were forcibly locked inside the confined, suffocating space of a car trunk, trapped in pitch darkness, listening to the unfolding horror outside. The torment did not end there. The details of that night in 1966 remain etched in the collective memory of the community as an event of pure evil. The victims were mercilessly tortured, with a broomstick used as an instrument of savage cruelty, a detail that would later cement McDuff's terrifying legacy. Finally, demonstrating a complete lack of humanity and a profound disregard for human life, the perpetrators shot and killed all three teenagers. In the span of a few dark hours, three bright futures were violently extinguished, leaving behind shattered families and a community paralyzed by grief and disbelief. The town of Rosebud would never be the same. The illusion of safety had been violently stripped away. When law enforcement eventually apprehended Kenneth Allen McDuff, there was a collective, albeit devastated, sigh of relief. The justice system moved with deliberate force. The trial laid bare the monstrous nature of the crimes, and the state of Texas, known for its unyielding stance on capital punishment, delivered its ultimate verdict. In 1966, McDuff was handed down a sentence of death. For the grieving families of the three teenagers, and for the traumatized community of Rosebud, this sentence offered a grim but necessary closure. The ultimate price was to be paid. The predator had been permanently neutralized. The promise of the justice system appeared to have been fulfilled. The monster was destined for the execution chamber, and society could begin the long, slow process of healing. But the wheels of justice are inexorably tied to the shifting sands of legal precedent and political climate. As the 1960s bled into the 1970s, a profound transformation was occurring within the highest courts of the United States. A national debate regarding the constitutionality and application of the death penalty was reaching a boiling point. This debate culminated in a landmark ruling by the United States Supreme Court in 1972, a case that would send shockwaves through every prison in the country. The ruling effectively declared the death penalty, as it was then applied, to be unconstitutional, resulting in a nationwide moratorium on capital punishment. In an instant, the landscape of American justice was radically altered, and in a cold cell in Texas, the immediate consequence of this supreme legal shift fell upon Kenneth Allen McDuff. His sentence of death, a sentence that had provided the only sliver of solace to the families of his victims, was automatically commuted. The absolute finality of the execution chamber was replaced by a sentence of life imprisonment. But within the labyrinthine rules of the penal system, a life sentence did not necessarily mean life behind bars. It carried with it a terrifying caveat. It meant life with the possibility of parole. The first microscopic crack in the concrete wall of the justice system had appeared, although few could have predicted the catastrophic deluge that would eventually pour through it. For a time, the monster remained caged. The 1970s gave way to the 1980s, and a new crisis began to engulf the state of Texas. The prison system, designed to house a specific capacity of inmates, began to buckle under the weight of an escalating population. Decades of aggressive sentencing had filled the cell blocks beyond their limits. The infrastructure was crumbling, the administration was overwhelmed, and federal mandates demanded immediate action to alleviate the severe, inhumane overcrowding. The state was forced into a desperate administrative corner. To make room for new offenders, they had to release existing inmates. The parole boards were mandated into a frantic process of reviewing files, searching for individuals who could be quietly reintegrated into society to ease the immense pressure on the penal system. It was within this climate of bureaucratic desperation and systemic compromise that one of the most fatal decisions in legal history was made. Files were reviewed, risk assessments were calculated, and somehow, through a combination of administrative oversight, legal loopholes, and a desperate need to clear prison beds, the file of Kenneth Allen McDuff was pushed forward. The horrific details of 1966, the tortured teenagers, the brutal violence, were somehow overshadowed by the immediate crisis of overcrowding. In 1989, the unthinkable happened. The state of Texas, the very entity that had promised to protect its citizens, granted parole to the broomstick killer. The heavy steel doors of the prison swung open, and Kenneth Allen McDuff walked out into the bright Texas sunlight, a free man. The release of such a profoundly dangerous individual back into a trusting public is a concept that defies logic. It represents a fundamental breakdown of the basic duty of the state. The families of the original victims, who had spent decades trying to piece their lives back together under the assumption that the murderer was permanently locked away, were suddenly thrust back into a living nightmare. But the true horror of this systemic failure was yet to unfold. The parole board had essentially handed a loaded weapon back to a predator who had merely been biding his time. Almost immediately upon his return to society in 1989, the dark impulses that had driven him in 1966 reemerged with terrifying ferocity. He did not seek redemption. He sought new hunting grounds. He embarked on a relentless, monstrous campaign of terror across the state of Texas. The quiet roads and desolate stretches of highway became his domain. He began to stalk, capture, and brutalize a new generation of victims. The pattern of unspeakable violence returned, characterized by sexual assault, forced captivity, and ultimate, lethal silence. For 3 agonizing years, from 1989 to 1992, a shadow fell over the women of Texas. At least 9 women were systematically hunted down, their lives violently stolen by a man who should never have been allowed to draw another breath of free air. The terror was widespread, the disappearances baffling and heartbreaking. Each missing poster, each discovered victim, represented a fresh failure of the system that had inexplicably let him go. The public realization that a previously condemned killer was operating freely among them sparked widespread panic and a profound, burning outrage against the authorities. The justice system had not only failed to protect the innocent, it had actively facilitated their slaughter. When the massive manhunt finally culminated in his recapture in 1992, the damage was already immeasurable. The legacy of his second reign of terror was etched into the very soil of Texas. The ensuing legal proceedings were less a trial and more a grim accounting of the state's own complicity through negligence. He was once again condemned to death. In 1998, the state finally executed the sentence by lethal injection, permanently closing the book on Kenneth Allen McDuff. But the execution offered little comfort. It could not bring back the 9 women whose lives were sacrificed on the altar of administrative convenience. It could not erase the profound trauma inflicted on dozens of families. The story we are delving into is a harrowing exploration of the fragility of the systems we trust with our lives. It forces us to confront the terrifying reality that justice is not infallible, that bureaucracy can be lethal, and that a signature on a parole document can be just as deadly as a physical weapon. This is the dark, tragic, and infuriating chronicle of the broomstick killer, a narrative that demands we remember the victims and compels us to scrutinize the monumental failures of a system that allowed a monster to strike twice. To truly comprehend the magnitude of the devastation inflicted upon the state of Texas, we must first step away from the cold, sterile mechanics of the justice system and turn our attention to the human lives that were violently extinguished. The heart of any true crime narrative does not belong to the perpetrator, no matter how notorious or terrifying they might be. The heart belongs to the victims. They are the center of gravity in this tragic universe. The innocent souls who were simply navigating their ordinary lives when they were suddenly intercepted by an unfathomable darkness. In the case of the broomstick killer, the tragedy is compounded by a chilling duality, a timeline fractured into two distinct eras of suffering, separated by more than 2 decades but bound together by the same relentless predator. We must examine the landscapes of these two eras, the quiet innocence of the 1960s and the sprawling vulnerability of the late 1980s, to understand exactly what was lost. In 1966, the town of Rosebud, Texas, was a place defined by its profound tranquility. Situated in the heart of the state, it was a rural enclave where the vast Texas sky stretched uninterrupted over endless acres of agricultural land. The rhythm of life here was slow, dictated by the changing of the seasons and the close-knit bonds of community. Everyone knew their neighbors, doors were rarely locked, and the concept of violent, predatory crime was something that belonged strictly to the realm of fiction or distant, sprawling metropolises. For the teenagers growing up in Rosebud during this era, the world felt infinitely safe and full of promise. The evenings were meant for long drives down dusty country roads, for gathering with friends, and for looking out at the horizon with a sense of unbounded youthful optimism. It was within this idyllic setting that 3 innocent teenagers found themselves on a night that should have been nothing more than an ordinary memory of youth. There was a young woman, possessing the bright, hopeful spirit characteristic of her age, accompanied by 2 young men, her peers and companions. They were the very embodiment of small-town American youth, carrying with them the hopes of their families and the quiet potential of a lifetime yet to be lived. They had dreams, they had aspirations, and they had an absolute, fundamental trust in the safety of their surroundings. The car they drove was a symbol of their emerging independence, a safe haven where they could share secrets, listen to the radio, and simply exist in the carefree space between childhood and adulthood. The sudden intrusion of Kenneth Allen McDuff and his accomplice into this pristine world was not merely an act of violence. It was an absolute desecration. The transition from mundane teenage normalcy to a waking nightmare occurred in a matter of seconds. We must pause to consider the profound psychological terror experienced by these 3 young people in their final hours. The young woman was separated from her friends, subjected to unspeakable horrors, her bodily autonomy and dignity violently stripped away in an act of supreme malice. Meanwhile, her 2 male companions were forced into the suffocating, pitch-black confines of a car trunk. Trapped in the dark, breathing stale air, they were completely powerless, forced to listen to the unfolding nightmare outside, their minds undoubtedly racing with a primal, agonizing fear. The physical torment that followed, characterized by the brutal use of a broomstick, elevates this crime from a standard act of violence to a display of sadistic cruelty that defies human comprehension. The sheer physical pain inflicted upon them was matched only by the psychological agony of knowing they were entirely at the mercy of individuals devoid of empathy. When the fatal gunshots finally rang out into the quiet Texas night, they severed 3 distinct, irreplaceable threads in the fabric of the Rosebud community. 3 families were permanently shattered, left to navigate an ocean of grief that would never truly recede. The town lost its innocence in a single, bloody stroke. The fields and roads of Rosebud would forever carry the phantom echoes of that horrific night, serving as a grim reminder that pure evil could, and did, manifest in their own backyard. Decades passed, and the landscape of Texas underwent a significant transformation. As the 1980s drew to a close and the 1990s began, the state had grown more populous, more sprawling, and more complex. The town of Waco and its surrounding regions were now connected by a vast network of highways and interstates, arteries of asphalt that facilitated constant movement and transition. The trusting, unlocked door mentality of the 1960s had gradually faded, replaced by the cautious awareness of modern society. Yet, despite this modernization, people still had to live their daily lives. They had to commute to work, run errands at local convenience stores, and travel the long, lonely stretches of highway that crisscrossed the state. It was into this modernized, sprawling environment that a ghost from the past was inexplicably released. When Kenneth Allen McDuff walked out of prison in 1989, he stepped into a world that was entirely unprepared for his return. And this time, his hunting ground was vast. The victims of this second, catastrophic wave of violence were not teenagers parked on a quiet country road, but rather adult women simply navigating the necessary routines of their daily existence. Over the course of 3 years, at least 9 women were systematically hunted, captured, and eradicated. We must consider the profound vulnerability of these 9 women. They were daughters, sisters, mothers, and friends. They were active participants in their communities, holding down jobs, raising families, and contributing to the world around them. Their lives were defined by a million mundane, beautiful details that were suddenly and violently interrupted. Unlike the victims in 1966, these women were moving through a world where they assumed the most dangerous predators were locked away behind bars. They trusted the system that had sworn to protect them, entirely unaware that a catastrophic administrative failure had unleashed a monster back into their midst. The circumstances surrounding the abductions of these women highlight the terrifying randomness of predatory violence. A woman stopping for gas late at night, bathed in the harsh, flickering glow of fluorescent lights. A woman walking to her vehicle in a desolate parking lot after a long shift at work. A woman whose car broke down on the side of a lonely highway, waiting for a helping hand that never arrived. In these isolated, transient moments, the predator struck. The sheer terror of being suddenly overpowered, of being dragged from the familiar world into a vehicle of captivity, is a horror that binds all 9 of these victims together. The grief generated by this second wave of murders was entirely different from the focused, communal mourning of Rosebud in 1966. This was a sprawling, statewide epidemic of sorrow and outrage. With every disappearance, with every grim discovery of remains in a secluded wooded area or a shallow grave, a new family was plunged into the darkest depths of despair. The agony of the families was uniquely cruel, characterized by agonizing periods of uncertainty, desperate searches, and the eventual, soul-crushing confirmation of their worst fears. But beneath the profound sorrow, there was a simmering, palpable anger. The families of these 9 women were forced to confront a reality that is almost impossible to reconcile. The man who had brutally ended the lives of their loved ones was not a first-time offender who had slipped through the cracks. He was a known entity, a documented monster who had previously been condemned to die for an identical pattern of savage violence. The realization that their daughters, sisters, and mothers were essentially collateral damage in a bureaucratic crisis of prison overcrowding added an excruciating layer of injustice to their grief. The state had gambled with public safety, and these 9 women had paid the ultimate price for that gamble. To look at the portraits of the victims from both eras is to witness a timeline of stolen humanity. The 3 teenagers from Rosebud remain forever frozen in the amber of 1966, their youthful faces a permanent reminder of a shattered idyllic past. The 9 women from the late 80s and early 90s represent the vibrant, complex tapestry of modern life that was violently unraveled. There are at least 12 lives in total, 12 distinct universes of potential, extinguished by a single individual. The profound tragedy of this narrative is not merely the violence itself, but the agonizing truth that the latter 9 victims should have been entirely safe. They were sacrificed on the altar of a broken system. As we delve deeper into the mechanics of this catastrophic failure, we must carry the memory of these 12 individuals with us, allowing their stolen futures to serve as the silent, powerful engine that drives our demand for accountability and justice. The transition from the tranquility of 1966 to the sprawling chaos of the late 1980s brings us to the core of the nightmare, the actual mechanics of the crimes and the unfolding terror that defined the physical reality of Kenneth Allen McDuff's existence in both eras. When we examine the concept of an incident in the context of true crime, we are often tempted to look for elaborate plots, complex criminal masterminds, and intricate games of cat and mouse. But the horrifying truth of McDuff is that his actions were marked by a brutal, unadorned simplicity. He was a predator who relied on the element of surprise, on raw physical intimidation, and on the terrifying vulnerability of his targets. There was no grand philosophy behind his violence, no twisted intellectual pursuit. There was only an unquenchable, base desire to dominate, to torture, and to destroy. To understand how he operated is to look directly into the abyss of human cruelty, tracing the exact sequence of events that transformed ordinary days into scenes of absolute horror. The first manifestation of this horrific methodology took place on that fateful night in Rosebud, Texas, in 1966. Let us reconstruct the physical environment of that evening. The three teenagers were enjoying the quintessential freedom of their youth, driving through the quiet rural roads where the headlights cut through the thick darkness, illuminating the dusty paths and the looming silhouettes of distant trees. They had no reason to suspect that the darkness held anything more dangerous than the native wildlife of the region. But the shadows concealed Kenneth Allen McDuff and his accomplice, two individuals whose paths intersected with the young victims in a catastrophic collision of fates. The interception was swift and ruthless. With calculated aggression, McDuff forced their vehicle to a halt, cutting off their escape and instantly stripping away their illusion of safety. In that single, terrifying second, the dynamic shifted entirely. The victims went from being independent individuals with their whole lives ahead of them to becoming captive prey. The physical actions that followed demonstrate a chilling level of sadism and methodical cruelty. McDuff and his accomplice did not simply commit an act of opportunistic violence. They subjected their captives to a prolonged, calculated ordeal. The young woman, isolated from her companions, faced an unimaginable violation, stripped of her bodily autonomy and subjected to horrific sexual assault. The sheer terror of her situation is something the human mind recoils from imagining. A moment of profound helplessness where every instinct of self-preservation screamed against an inescapable reality. Meanwhile, her two male companions were treated with a dehumanizing callousness that defies belief. They were forcibly stuffed into the cramped, pitch-black confines of the car trunk. Imagine the sensory deprivation of that space. The air quickly grew stale. The temperature rose, and the sounds of the unfolding nightmare outside filtered through the metal frame in muffled, terrifying waves. They were trapped in total darkness, forced to listen to the sounds of distress, knowing they were completely powerless to intervene, and acutely aware that their own turns were fast approaching. The escalation of the violence inside the secluded area reached its peak with the use of the weapon that would forever brand McDuff in the historical record. The introduction of the broomstick as an instrument of torture is a detail that lingers with a sickening gravity, illustrating a level of malicious creativity that goes far beyond simple murder. It was an act designed to humiliate, to break the human spirit entirely, and to inflict maximum physical agony before the final, lethal act. The finality of the violence arrived with the discharge of firearms. The gunshots rang out into the quiet night air of Rosebud, sharp and definitive, shattering the peace of the countryside. In moments, the lives of the three teenagers were extinguished, their bodies left behind in the desolate landscape as the perpetrators fled into the night. The crime scene, when eventually discovered by law enforcement, was a tableau of pure devastation, a grim physical manifestation of the absolute worst that humanity is capable of producing. Fast forward more than 2 decades, and the methodology, though adapted to a new era, retained its core elements of abduction, captivity, and brutal execution. When McDuff was released on parole in 1989, he did not waste any time returning to the only way of interacting with the world that he truly understood. The second wave of terror, spanning from 1989 to 1992, was characterized by a terrifying mobility. No longer confined to the rural isolation of Rosebud, McDuff now operated across the expanding highway networks and growing urban fringes of Texas. The modern world provided him with a new mask of anonymity. People were constantly on the move, commuting between cities, stopping at roadside businesses, and navigating vast expanses of asphalt. This transient environment became his hunting ground, and the women he targeted became the silent casualties of a system that had set him free. The mechanics of these later crimes reveal a chilling pattern of opportunity and predation. McDuff would cruise the highways and byways, searching for vulnerability, Unlike the targeted interception of the teenagers in a parked car, the victims of this second era were often intercepted during the most mundane transitions of their daily lives. A woman whose car experienced mechanical trouble on a lonely stretch of road became an instant target. A woman walking alone across a dimly lit parking lot after a late shift at work found herself completely exposed to a sudden, violent ambush. McDuff possessed an uncanny, predatory instinct for identifying these moments of isolation. He would close the distance with startling speed, utilizing intimidation and overwhelming force to drag his victims from the familiar world into the claustrophobic confines of his vehicle. Once captive, the women were subjected to horrors eerily reminiscent of his earlier crimes. The period between their initial abduction and their ultimate murder was marked by unspeakable captivity and sexual violence. McDuff drove them to remote locations, secluded wooded areas, and abandoned properties scattered across the vast Texas landscape where no one could hear their cries for help. The psychological torment of knowing that you are entirely at the mercy of a known monster, realizing that no one is coming to save you, must have been an ocean of pure agony. Yet McDuff operated with a chilling coldness, treating these human lives with total disposability. After the assaults were complete, he silenced them permanently, using methods designed to ensure that the victims could never bear witness against him. He disposed of their bodies in shallow graves, overgrown fields, and desolate ditches, transforming the sunlit beauty of the Texas countryside into a vast, hidden graveyard. The sheer volume of this second wave of terror is what elevates it from an isolated tragedy to a statewide catastrophe. At least 9 women were systematically hunted and destroyed over this 3-year period. Each disappearance sent shockwaves through local communities, triggering frantic searches, heartbreaking media appeals, and an escalating sense of dread among the public. The physical evidence left behind at these various crime scenes was often sparse, scattered across immense geographic distances, making the task of connecting the dots an immense challenge for law enforcement agencies who were initially investigating disparate missing persons cases. It took time, coordination, and the horrifying realization that a serial predator was operating with absolute impunity for the true scope of the carnage to come into focus. As we trace the physical path of these incidents, from the quiet rural roads of 1966 to the sprawling asphalt arteries of the early 90s, we are struck by the unbroken continuity of McDuff's nature. Prison had not rehabilitated him. It had merely served as a temporary pause button on a relentless engine of destruction. The system had given him a second chance, and he had used it to construct a new mountain of corpses. The physical reality of his crimes leaves an indelible stain on the history of American jurisprudence, serving as a permanent, haunting reminder of what happens when the mechanisms designed to protect society fail catastrophically at their most fundamental level. The transition from the horrifying reality of the crime scenes to the arduous, painstaking work of law enforcement brings us face to face with the fourth movement of our tragic narrative, the complex and agonizing process of investigation, and the pivotal turning points that ultimately unraveled the shadow cast by Kenneth Allen McDuff. When a serial predator operates across vast geographic distances and utilizes the anonymity of modern highways, the traditional boundaries of local policing often become severe impediments to justice. In the early 1990s, police departments across various jurisdictions in Texas were grappling with a series of perplexing disappearances and the grim discovery of scattered human remains. At first, these cases were handled as isolated incidents, individual tragedies investigated by separate county sheriffs and city police forces who had no immediate reason to connect a missing woman in one town to a body found in a remote wooded area miles away. The fragmented nature of local law enforcement created a veil of operational blindness, allowing a seasoned and ruthless killer to move through the cracks of the system without immediately triggering a unified, statewide manhunt. The investigation required a fundamental shift in perspective, an awakening that began when detectives started comparing notes, analyzing forensic anomalies, and recognizing chilling patterns in the manner of abduction and disposal. The realization that a singular, highly mobile predator was responsible for the escalating body count sent a wave of profound urgency through the Texas law enforcement community. Investigators began poring over old case files, interviewing witnesses, and retracing the frantic, final movements of the victims. Every piece of circumstantial evidence, every minor sighting near a convenience store or a roadside breakdown, was scrutinized with intense microscopic focus. Yet, the investigation was continuously hampered by the sheer vastness of the Texas landscape. A killer who buries his victims in overgrown fields and remote ditches leaves behind an environment where nature itself conspires to hide the truth, swallowing evidence beneath layers of soil, brush, and the relentless passage of time. As the net began to tighten, the psychological profile of the suspect emerged with terrifying clarity. Investigators were not looking for a random, disorganized offender. They were tracking a calculated, highly experienced predator who understood how to exploit the vulnerabilities of an unsuspecting public. The breakthrough moments in the investigation did not come easily. They were forged through sheer persistence, late nights in dimly lit precinct offices, and the agonizingly slow accumulation of forensic clues. Detectives began compiling a list of potential suspects, cross-referencing vehicle descriptions, and looking closely at individuals with violent pasts who had recently re-entered society. The name Kenneth Allen McDuff, buried deep within the historical archives of the Texas Department of Corrections, began to surface as a ghost from a nightmare that many hoped had been permanently locked away. The moment law enforcement agencies finally connected the dots and focused their collective investigative might on McDuff, the atmosphere shifted from uncertainty to a relentless, high-stakes pursuit. The realization of who he was and how he had come to be walking free among them added a bitter, desperate edge to the manhunt. Officers across the state were briefed on his background, his known methods, and the absolute imperative of taking him off the streets before another life could be claimed. The investigation transitioned into a race against time, a tense and dangerous game of cat and mouse, where every passing day represented an intolerable risk to the public. Detectives staked out locations, monitored movements, and followed every tenuous lead, knowing that they were hunting a man who possessed no moral boundaries and nothing left to lose. The climax of this intensive investigation arrived in 1992, when the convergence of physical evidence, witness accounts, and tactical surveillance finally cornered the elusive predator. The arrest of Kenneth Allen McDuff was not a cinematic shootout, but rather a chillingly mundane apprehension that abruptly punctured the illusion of safety he had enjoyed during his years of freedom. When law enforcement officers closed in and placed him in handcuffs, the immediate physical threat was finally neutralized, but the emotional and systemic reckoning was only just beginning. The arrest marked the end of the manhunt, yet it opened up a vast, agonizing panorama of unanswered questions, forcing the investigators, the legal system, and the public to confront the horrifying reality of how a known monster had been handed back the keys to his freedom. The meticulous work of the detectives had stopped the bleeding, but the scar left on the state of Texas would remain forever as a testament to a catastrophic failure of institutional oversight. The final chapter of accountability brought the state of Texas to a deeply solemn and profoundly complex judicial reckoning as the legal machinery swung into motion, following the capture of Kenneth Allen McDuff in 1992. The courtroom proceedings that ensued were far more than a standard criminal trial. They represented an agonizing public autopsy of a broken system and a formal accounting of unmitigated evil. When McDuff sat at the defense table, his demeanor was marked by a chilling indifference, a cold detachment that had defined his entire existence as a predator. The legal teams on both sides understood the monumental weight of the proceedings, knowing that the eyes of a traumatized state and a grieving nation were fixed squarely upon the courthouse in Texas. The prosecution faced the immense task of presenting a comprehensive, airtight narrative that bridged the sprawling horrors of his second wave of murders with the haunting ghost of his 1966 conviction, ensuring that there would be no legal loopholes left unexamined and no technicalities through which the killer could slip. The trial itself unfolded as a meticulous, heartbreaking presentation of evidence, testimonies, and forensic reconstructions that laid bare the sheer scale of the devastation McDuff had unleashed. Prosecutors brought forward a mountain of physical evidence, ranging from forensic markers collected at scattered dump sites to personal belongings of the victims that tied the killer inexorably to the disappearance of each of the 9 women. Witness testimonies provided a visceral, agonizing window into the final moments of the victims' lives, drawing gasps from the gallery and forcing the jury to confront the brutal reality of the defendant's actions. Defense attorneys attempted to navigate the impossible terrain of establishing reasonable doubt in the face of overwhelming evidence, but the sheer volume of corroborating material made their task insurmountable. Every piece of testimony was delivered with a heavy, sorrowful gravity, reflecting the profound solemnity of a courtroom that understood it was dealing with a criminal of unprecedented notoriety in the annals of Texas jurisprudence. As the trial progressed toward its inevitable conclusion, the arguments focused heavily on the unique historical context of the defendant's criminal career. The prosecution emphasized that McDuff was not merely a repeat offender, but a man who had already been judged, condemned, and sentenced to death a quarter of a century prior, only to be released due to a catastrophic failure of bureaucratic and legal processes. This historical duality hung over the courtroom like a dark cloud, serving as an implicit indictment of the very system that was now tasked with trying him for a second time. The jury listened intently as the state painted a vivid, horrifying portrait of a man who viewed human life as entirely disposable, a relentless engine of destruction that could never be rehabilitated or safely integrated back into human society. The defense counsel labored to find arguments within the boundaries of capital jurisprudence, but the weight of the evidence and the sheer magnitude of the crimes rendered their efforts purely procedural. When the jury finally retired to deliberate, the tension inside the courthouse reached a fever pitch, though the outcome was viewed by legal observers as a foregone conclusion. The deliberations were thorough and deliberate, a testament to the gravity with which the jurors approached their solemn duty to deliver a verdict that aligned with the law and the scale of the atrocities committed. Upon returning to the courtroom, the foreperson delivered the verdict that everyone anticipated yet shuddered to hear. Kenneth Allen McDuff was found guilty on all counts, his guilt established beyond any shadow of a doubt through a mountain of forensic proof and compelling witness testimony. The courtroom remained deathly silent, the atmosphere thick with a mixture of profound relief and lingering sorrow as the formal finding of guilt was entered into the permanent record of the state of Texas. The sentencing phase that immediately followed brought the proceedings to their ultimate, dramatic climax. The prosecution presented the necessary aggravating factors, highlighting the calculated nature of the abductions, the brutality of the assaults, and the chilling reality of his prior capital murder conviction from 1966. The judge, bearing the immense weight of judicial history, prepared to deliver the sentence that the law demanded and the public required. There was a profound stillness in the room as the final words were spoken, condemning Kenneth Allen McDuff to death by lethal injection. For the families of the victims who sat in the gallery, holding hands and wiping away tears, the sentence provided a grim, necessary measure of justice, though it could never undo the irreversible damage or bring their loved ones back. The legal avenues for appeal, which inevitably followed the death sentence, were fought with the meticulous rigor characteristic of capital cases, but the overwhelming weight of the evidence ensured that the verdict remained unshakable. Years ticked by as McDuff sat on death row, appealing to higher courts and attempting to delay the inevitable consequence of his actions. Yet, the legal machinery that had once tragically failed society by letting him out now moved with deliberate, unyielding force toward his execution. The appeals were systematically rejected, each court recognizing that the safety of the public and the demands of absolute justice required the permanent removal of this singular threat from the world. The chapter of judicial proceedings was inexorably drawing to a close, paving the way for the final execution of a sentence that should have been carried out decades prior. The culmination of this exhaustive legal journey arrived in 1998, inside the walls of the execution chamber in Huntsville, Texas. The procedures leading up to the final moment were marked by a strict adherence to protocol, a clinical and solemn process designed to carry out the state's ultimate punishment. As the lethal injection was administered, Kenneth Allen McDuff breathed his last breath, formally closing the book on a life defined by unimaginable cruelty and systemic tragedy. The execution chamber was quiet, the witnesses standing in silent reflection as the medical personnel pronounced death. Outside the prison walls, the news was received with a muted, solemn acknowledgement rather than a celebratory triumph. because everyone understood that this execution was merely the punctuation mark at the end of a sentence that had been delayed by decades of bureaucratic failure, paid for in the blood of innocent lives. The conclusion of the trial and the subsequent execution left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness of the legal and law enforcement communities in Texas. It forced prosecutors, judges, and legislators to look inward, examining the systemic vulnerabilities that had allowed a condemned killer to walk free in 1989. The courtroom had delivered its final verdict, and the executioner had fulfilled his duty, but the legal system itself remained on trial in the court of public opinion. The proceedings demonstrated both the capacity of the law to achieve ultimate accountability and its terrifying vulnerability to human error and administrative oversight. As the legal files were finally closed and archived, the shadow of Kenneth McDuff remained permanently etched into the history books as a stark, haunting reminder of the high stakes involved when justice stumbles and the innocent are left unprotected. The final legacy of the Kenneth McDuff case extends far beyond the confines of the courtroom and the grim finality of the execution chamber, settling instead as a permanent, haunting scar upon the conscience of the American judicial system. When we reflect upon the entirety of this dark narrative, we are forced to confront the profound and sobering reality that the greatest tragedies are sometimes not those caused entirely by the unpredictable nature of human malice, but rather those enabled by the systematic failures of the institutions we trust to protect us. The story of the broomstick killer is not merely an isolated anomaly in the annals of true crime. It is a masterclass in institutional breakdown, a terrifying demonstration of how bureaucratic oversight, overcrowded prisons, and flawed parole policies can accidentally conspire to unleash absolute horror upon an unsuspecting public. The aftermath of this case demanded a radical, unflinching self-examination from legislators, law enforcement agencies, and parole boards across the entire state of Texas and beyond, forcing a complete overhaul of how society evaluates, manages, and restricts violent predators. To truly understand the depth of this legacy, we must return to the fundamental social contract that underpins modern civilization, the promise that the state will maintain a secure barrier between the innocent and those who wish to do them harm. In the case of McDuff, that barrier was not merely breached, it was systematically dismantled by the very mechanisms designed to reinforce it. The decision to release a man who had already been condemned to death for a horrific, multi-victim capital murder was an administrative catastrophe of historic proportions. It exposed a chilling vulnerability in the penal system, revealing that the pressures of overcrowding and the bureaucratic drive to clear prison beds could override common sense, public safety, and basic human morality. The families of the 9 women who perished during his second reign of terror were left to grapple with an agonizing truth, namely, that their loved ones were essentially sacrificed on the altar of administrative convenience and institutional negligence. Their grief was magnified by the unbearable realization that these murders were entirely preventable, that every single life lost between 1989 and 1992 was the collateral damage of a system that had failed to honor its most sacred commitment. The public outcry that followed the exposure of McDuff's crimes and his shocking parole history was swift, fierce, and entirely justified. Communities across Texas demanded answers, holding accountable the administrative bodies that had allowed a known monster to walk free among them. The pressure from citizens, victims' advocacy groups, and media investigations forced lawmakers to look inward and confront the systemic rot that had infected the parole process. No longer could parole boards operate in a shroud of bureaucratic secrecy or rely on superficial assessments that prioritized administrative metrics over public safety. The legislation that emerged in the wake of this disaster was designed to close the dangerous loopholes that had granted McDuff his freedom. Statutes were rewritten, sentencing guidelines were drastically tightened, and the criteria for releasing violent offenders back into society were subjected to intense, rigorous scrutiny. The state of Texas instituted permanent reforms aimed at ensuring that a predator convicted of capital crimes would never again benefit from systemic leniency or administrative oversight failures. Yet, while policy changes and legislative overhauls are essential components of institutional reform, they can never truly erase the permanent damage inflicted by the original failure. The legacy of the broomstick killer serves as a perpetual, chilling reminder to every generation of law enforcement and judicial officials that the stakes of their decisions are measured in human lives. Whenever a file is reviewed, whenever a sentence is evaluated, and whenever a parole hearing is conducted, the ghost of Kenneth Allen McDuff looms large in the background, a silent sentinel warning against complacency, administrative fatigue, and dangerous compromises. The case taught a brutal, unforgiving lesson to the American legal system, demonstrating that justice delayed or justice compromised is not merely an administrative imperfection, but an active invitation to catastrophe. The systemic changes implemented in Texas became a benchmark for other jurisdictions nationwide, prompting a broader national conversation about the delicate balance between penal rehabilitation and absolute public protection. As we bring our comprehensive exploration of this dark chapter to a close, we must ensure that our focus remains fixed where it rightfully belongs, not on the monstrous actions of the perpetrator, but on the enduring memory of the victims whose lives were so cruelly stolen. From the 3 teenagers in Rosebud, Texas, whose youthful optimism was shattered in 1966, to the 9 women whose modern lives were abruptly terminated during the terror of the early 90s, 12 distinct universes of potential were extinguished by a single individual's capacity for unimaginable cruelty. Their stories are a testament to the fragility of human existence and the profound importance of maintaining an unyielding vigilance against the forces of darkness. We remember them not as statistics in a true crime ledger, but as daughters, sisters, friends, and individuals who deserve to live out their natural lives in peace and safety. Their collective tragedy forged a permanent, painful chapter in the history of jurisprudence, reminding us forever of the heavy price of systemic failure and the eternal necessity of a vigilant, uncompromising justice. As we stand at the furthermost horizon of this dark narrative, looking back across the decades that separate us from the living nightmare of Kenneth Allen McDuff, we are compelled to examine the deeper structural evolution of how society guards its most vulnerable members. The ripple effects of a tragedy of this magnitude do not dissipate simply because the perpetrator has been executed and the courtrooms have grown quiet. Instead, they settle deep into the institutional memory of the legal and penal frameworks, serving as a permanent cautionary tale about the perils of administrative complacency and systemic fatigue. When a judicial system makes a catastrophic error, such as releasing a convicted capital murderer back into an unsuspecting community, the resulting scars force a profound, unyielding reassessment of the entire philosophy of punishment, rehabilitation, and public safety. The case of the broomstick killer became a foundational turning point in how American jurisprudence approaches the complex, often contradictory goals of reforming offenders while ensuring that absolute protection is maintained for the public at large. One of the most significant shifts that emerged from this dark period was a fundamental transformation in the operation of parole boards and correctional administration across the board. Prior to the McDuff disaster, parole decisions were frequently viewed through an administrative lens that prioritized institutional metrics, bed capacity, and theoretical rehabilitation models over rigorous risk assessment. The severe overcrowding of Texas prisons in the 1980s created an atmosphere of desperate expedience, where files were processed with an alarming lack of scrutiny regarding the actual, inherent dangerousness of the individual being released. The horrific consequences of that expedience demonstrated to lawmakers and penal experts alike that the cost of administrative convenience can be measured directly in human blood. In the wake of McDuff's second wave of terror, parole boards across the nation were subjected to intense legislative oversight and rigorous structural overhauls throughout the entire judicial apparatus. Statutes were enacted that mandated stricter evaluation criteria, requiring comprehensive psychological evaluations, historical risk profiling, and explicit consideration of the severity of original offenses before any violent offender could even be considered for release. The era of casual or automated parole consideration for violent criminals was decisively brought to an end, replaced by a cautious, highly restrictive framework designed to prevent history from ever repeating itself. Furthermore, the investigation and prosecution of McDuff's second reign of terror highlighted critical vulnerabilities in interagency communication and jurisdictional cooperation among law enforcement entities. During the early 1990s, when women were disappearing across disparate counties and municipalities in Texas, The fragmented nature of local policing initially hindered a unified response. Separate police departments and county sheriff's offices were operating within their own operational silos, unaware that a highly mobile predator was systematically crossing borders to hunt his victims. The eventual realization that these isolated missing persons cases were part of a larger, interconnected pattern of serial murder catalyzed a revolution in law enforcement intelligence sharing. Regional task forces, statewide databases, and cross-jurisdictional cooperation across every single county became standard operating procedures rather than exception-based luxuries. Law enforcement agencies recognized that modern predators do not respect municipal boundaries or county lines. Therefore, the mechanisms used to track and apprehend them must possess an equal or superior degree of integration and mobility. Beyond the structural and legal reforms, the legacy of this case forced a profound cultural shift in how society perceives the victims of violent crime and the families left behind in their wake. For many years, true crime narratives and legal proceedings frequently focused an overwhelming amount of attention on the perpetrator, dissecting their psychology, their background, and the procedural nuances of their trials while inadvertently relegating the victims to mere footnotes in a larger tragedy. The sheer scale and horror of the McDuff case challenged this imbalance, elevating the voices and stories of the victims to their rightful place at the center of the discourse. The families of the victims became vocal advocates for systemic reform, transforming their personal grief into a powerful driving force for legislative change and national legislative agendas. Their relentless pursuit of accountability ensured that the institutional failures which enabled the killer's release were brought into the harsh light of public scrutiny, preventing the state from quietly burying its mistakes beneath bureaucratic paperwork. This grassroots advocacy helped reshape victim rights laws across the United States, ensuring that surviving family members were given a meaningful voice in parole hearings and legal proceedings, transforming them from passive observers into active participants in the pursuit of justice. The psychological impact of the McDuff case on the communities of Texas and the broader American public cannot be overstated. It punctured the illusion of localized safety, reminding everyday citizens across generations that darkness can emerge from the most unexpected places and that the institutions designed to protect them are not infallible. The fear that permeated the state during those harrowing years between 1989 and 1992 left an indelible psychological footprint. People became more cautious, communities grew more vigilant, and a pervasive sense of vulnerability settled over the public consciousness. Yet, out of this profound fear and sorrow also emerged a resilient determination to ensure that the system would do better. The collective trauma experienced during those years galvanized public support for tougher sentencing laws, better victim support services, and greater transparency within the correctional system. It served as a stark, sobering reminder that the price of safety is eternal vigilance, both from those who enforce the law and from the society that empowers them to do so. As we reflect upon the entirety of this dark chronicle, we are reminded of the immense fragility of human life and the absolute necessity of maintaining an uncompromising commitment to justice. The story of Kenneth Allen McDuff is a complex tapestry of institutional failure, horrific violence, and eventual accountability, but its true heart remains anchored in the memory of those who were lost. From the 3 teenagers in Rosebud whose youthful dreams were brutally cut short in 1966, to the 9 women whose modern lives were systematically eradicated during the early 90s, 12 distinct universes of potential were extinguished by an individual devoid of human empathy. Their lives, their struggles, and their untimely deaths demand our eternal remembrance. They were daughters, sisters, mothers, and friends whose existence mattered profoundly, and their tragic fates continue to serve as a solemn warning against the perils of institutional negligence. In closing this extensive exploration, we must recognize that true justice is not merely an event that occurs in a courtroom or an execution chamber. It is an ongoing, daily obligation. It requires those who wield authority within the legal system to remain constantly aware of the profound weight of their decisions, knowing that a single oversight can cascade into an irreversible catastrophe. The legacy of the broomstick killer stands as a permanent, haunting monument to what happens when that awareness fails. Yet it also stands as a testament to the resilience of human society, which took the darkest of lessons and forged from them a stronger, more accountable framework to protect the innocent. As the history books close on this harrowing chapter, the memory of the victims remains our guiding light, ensuring that their voices are never forgotten and that the tragic failures which claimed their lives are never repeated. As we arrive at the final frontier of our extensive exploration into the life, crimes, and catastrophic systemic fallout surrounding Kenneth Allen McDuff, we find ourselves lingering at the intersection of history, psychology, and jurisprudence. The narrative of the Broomstick Killer is not merely a dark chapter to be closed and forgotten on a dusty shelf of true crime archives. It is a permanent mirror held up to the machinery of modern civilization, reflecting the flaws, vulnerabilities, and blind spots that we so often prefer to ignore. When we look back across the decades, from the sun-drenched rural quiet of Rosebud in 1966 to the sprawling, asphalt-laced highway networks of the early 90s, we are forced to confront an uncomfortable truth about the nature of safety. Safety is not a static condition or a permanent guarantee bestowed upon us by the state. It is a fragile, actively maintained ecosystem that requires constant vigilance, unyielding accountability, and a profound respect for the gravity of justice. The failure of that ecosystem in the case of McDuff remains one of the most glaring, unforgivable administrative collapses in the history of American penology, serving as an eternal testament to what happens when bureaucratic expediency overrides the fundamental duty of public protection and societal preservation. To truly synthesize the lessons of this harrowing chronicle, we must examine the perpetrator not through the lens of cinematic caricature or supernatural myth, but through the sobering reality of his ordinary, mundane malevolence. Kenneth McDuff was not a grand criminal mastermind possessing a brilliant, calculating intellect. Rather, he was a predator of opportunity, a man driven by base compulsions, utter apathetic cruelty, and a profound lack of empathy. His ability to slip back into society in 1989 and resume his campaign of terror with chilling efficiency demonstrates the terrifying ease with which a malignant individual can exploit the cracks in a stress system. He walked among ordinary people, breathed the same air, and moved through the same everyday spaces as his victims, all while carrying a reservoir of violence that had already been officially condemned by the state a quarter of a century prior. The horror of McDuff lies precisely in his terrifying ordinariness, in the fact that he was a known, documented monster who was handed back his freedom not through a miraculous reformation or a miscarriage of justice in his initial trial, but through the cold, unfeeling calculus of prison overcrowding and administrative convenience. This realization shatters the comforting illusion that monsters always wear obvious masks, reminding us that the greatest dangers often wear the disguise of compliance and slip quietly through the administrative doors we ourselves have unlocked out of desperation. The repercussions of this systemic failure also catalyzed a profound transformation within the broader landscape of public awareness and criminal investigation, fundamentally altering how society engages with the reality of predatory crime. In the years following McDuff's execution in 1998, criminologists, legal scholars, and law enforcement agencies across the United States began dissecting the case as a textbook study in institutional dysfunction. Police academies integrated the missteps of the investigation and the parole board disaster into their curricula, teaching future generations of officers the vital importance of cross-jurisdictional communication, meticulous record-keeping, and the absolute necessity of treating every missing persons report with immediate, comprehensive urgency. The fragmentation that once allowed a serial predator to cross county lines with absolute impunity was systematically dismantled, replaced by integrated task forces and statewide intelligence networks designed to ensure that no criminal could ever again hide in the blind spots between local jurisdictions. In this sense, the blood of McDuff's victims helped forge a much sharper, more resilient shield for the public, transforming tragedy into a catalyst for institutional modernization and structural accountability that continues to protect citizens to this day. Yet, while institutional reforms and legislative overhauls are necessary monuments to progress, they can never fully balance the ledger of such profound loss. The human cost of the McDuff disaster remains its most defining and heartbreaking characteristic, anchored forever in the memories of the 12 individuals whose lives were prematurely stolen. From the 3 young teenagers whose futures were violently extinguished on a lonely road in Rosebud during the 1960s, to the 9 women whose modern lives were abruptly truncated during the terror of the early 90s. These victims represent a universe of unfulfilled potential, shattered dreams, and unimaginable grief. Their families were forced to navigate not only the immediate, earth-shattering trauma of losing a loved one to violence, but also the compounding, bureaucratic insult of realizing that those deaths were entirely preventable. The endurance of these families, their tireless advocacy, and their refusal to let the state quietly sweep its catastrophic mistakes under the rug stand as a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. They transformed their private agony into a public crusade for justice, forever reshaping victim rights and ensuring that the voices of the fallen would remain at the center of the legal and moral discourse across the nation. As we contemplate the philosophical implications of this case, we are confronted with the eternal tension between rehabilitation and public protection, 2 core pillars of the penal system that are constantly at war with one another. The case of the broomstick killer is frequently invoked in debates surrounding capital punishment, parole board discretion, and the limits of human redemption. It presents a stark, unyielding argument for the existence of individuals who are fundamentally beyond the reach of rehabilitation, entities whose capacity for cruelty is so absolute and ingrained that reintegrating them into human society represents an intolerable risk to the innocent. While modern penology rightly strives to rehabilitate offenders and offer pathways to redemption for those capable of change, the shadow of Macduff serves as an unshakable reminder that the primary obligation of the state is, and must always be, the protection of its law-abiding citizens. When that obligation is compromised by administrative fatigue or systemic overcrowding, the consequences are measured not in abstract political debates, but in real, human lives brutally cut short by monsters who should never have been allowed to walk free. The cultural footprint of the case also left an indelible mark on the true crime genre and public storytelling, shifting the focus from the sensationalized mythology of serial killers toward a deeper, more empathetic examination of systemic accountability and victim dignity. In the decades since the events unfolded, storytellers, journalists, and podcasters have increasingly recognized that the true power of these narratives does not lie in glorifying the perpetrator's dark exploits, but in honoring the memory of the victims and dissecting the institutional failures that allowed such tragedies to occur in the first place. By stripping away the sensationalism and focusing squarely on the facts, the legal battles, and the human impact, narratives like this serve an essential societal function. They act as a collective memory, ensuring that history is not easily forgotten and that the lessons painfully learned through tragedy continue to guide the decisions of future generations of lawmakers, judges, and law enforcement officers who hold the keys to public safety in their hands. Looking back from our current vantage point in the modern era, the story of Kenneth Allen Macduff remains one of the darkest and most sobering cautionary tales in the annals of American history. It reminds us that justice is a delicate, human creation, vulnerable to error, fatigue, and the pressures of bureaucracy. Yet it is also a system capable of self-correction, growth, and eventual accountability. The execution chamber in Huntsville closed the final physical chapter of his existence, but the legacy of his crimes continues to resonate through every reformed parole statute, every integrated law enforcement database, and every renewed commitment to protecting the vulnerable. The shadow he cast over Texas was immense and terrifying, but the light of vigilance, memory, and reform that rose in response has proven stronger, ensuring that his reign of terror remains an isolated monument to institutional failure rather than a recurring nightmare in the modern world. As we bring this comprehensive 8-part exploration to its definitive close, we leave behind the courtroom galleries, the desolate dump sites, and the quiet rural roads of Rosebud, carrying with us the enduring memory of those who were lost. The 12 individuals whose stories we have traced across these pages deserve long, full, and beautiful lives, surrounded by the people who loved them. Though their futures were violently stolen by a relentless predator enabled by a broken system, their legacy lives on in the ongoing pursuit of a safer, more just world. We remember them not through the lens of their final, tragic moments, but through the vibrant potential of who they were and what they meant to the world. As we step back into the ordinary rhythm of our own daily lives, let us carry forward the vital reminder that safety is a shared responsibility, that institutions must forever remain vigilant in their duty to protect, and that the memories of the innocent must always be preserved as a sacred, guiding light against the creeping darkness of the world. As we step beyond the structural horizons of our extensive investigation into the life and crimes of Kenneth Allen McDuff, we find ourselves lingering at a profound intellectual and emotional precipice. True crime storytelling, at its most elevated level, is never merely an exercise in recounting morbidity or cataloging the depths of human degradation. It is an exploration of the fragility of social order, a meticulous examination of the thin, invisible threads that separate civilization from chaos. When we look back across the decades, tracking the dark trajectory from the quiet rural isolation of Rosebud in 1966 to the sprawling, modern highway networks of the early 90s, we are forced to confront the haunting realization that history does not merely repeat itself. It echoes, reverberating through the legal precedents, the administrative policies, and the collective memory of every community touched by tragedy. The case of the broomstick killer stands as an eternal monument to this chilling reality, a stark reminder that when the mechanisms of justice falter, the cost is paid not in abstract political theories or bureaucratic friction, but in the irreplaceable lives of innocent human beings whose only crime was existing in the wrong place at the wrong time, trusting in a world that ultimately failed to protect them from the monsters walking among them in plain sight. To comprehend the full weight of this legacy, we must return once more to the concept of accountability, examining how institutions respond when their foundational promises are shattered. The release of Kenneth McDuff in 1989 remains one of the most catastrophic administrative failures in the history of American penology, an event that laid bare the terrifying vulnerabilities inherent in a system buckling under the immense weight of prison overcrowding and procedural expedients. Yet, the true tragedy of that failure is not simply that a mistake was made, but that the warning signs were ignored. The historical context of his original capital murder conviction was overshadowed by bureaucratic convenience, and a known predator was handed back the keys to his freedom under the naive assumption that time alone could pacify a mind entirely devoid of empathy. The subsequent murders of at least 9 women across Texas during his second reign of terror served as a brutal, unforgiving indictment of that institutional negligence, forcing a reluctant legal apparatus to look inward, to strip away the comfortable illusions of administrative infallibility, and to confront the grim truth that a failure to protect the public from a known monster is an active form of complicity that permanently stains the honor of the justice system. The aftermath of this statewide catastrophe catalyzed a profound, systemic awakening that permanently transformed the operational landscape of law enforcement and criminal justice. Across Texas and throughout jurisdictions nationwide, policymakers, prosecutors, and penal administrators were forced to reevaluate the delicate balance between rehabilitation and public protection. The loopholes that had allowed McDuff to slip through the cracks of the parole system were systematically targeted, dismantled, and replaced by rigorous, multi-layered evaluative frameworks designed to ensure that violent offenders could never again benefit from administrative fatigue or oversight complacency. Statutes were rewritten to mandate comprehensive psychological assessments, historical risk profiling, and an explicit prioritization of public safety above all else. Furthermore, the chaotic fragmentation that initially hindered the early stages of the investigation into the late 80s disappearances exposed the critical need for seamless interagency communication and cross-jurisdictional intelligence sharing. Regional task forces and statewide databases emerged from the ashes of these failures, ensuring that modern predators could no longer exploit the boundaries between local police departments and county sheriffs. In this way, the harrowing lessons of the McDuff case became a cornerstone of modern criminal investigation, hardening the shield that protects society against those who operate in the shadows of modern civilization. Yet, while legislative reforms and structural overhauls are essential components of institutional progress, they can never fully restore what was lost to the families and communities left behind. The true heart of this narrative does not reside within the cold machinery of the courtroom or the clinical protocols of service inside the execution chamber in Huntsville. It belongs entirely to the victims. From the 3 young teenagers whose bright futures were violently extinguished on a desolate road in Rosebud during the 1960s, to the 9 women whose complex, vibrant lives were abruptly terminated during the terror of the early 90s. 12 distinct universes of potential were permanently erased by a single individual's capacity for malice. Their stories remind us that behind every statistic in a true crime ledger lies a human soul, a daughter, a sister, a mother, a friend, whose absence left a permanent, bleeding void in the lives of those who loved them. The families of these victims carried an unbearable burden, navigating not only the unimaginable grief of their losses, but also the compounding outrage of realizing that those deaths were entirely preventable. Their tireless advocacy, their refusal to let the state quietly sweep its mistakes under the rug, and their transformation of private sorrow into a powerful crusade for systemic justice stand as the true moral anchor of this entire historical chapter, ensuring that the victims would never be forgotten and their names remain permanently embedded into the collective conscience. As we reflect upon the philosophical implications of this case, we are confronted with the eternal, inescapable tension that defines the administration of justice. The debate surrounding capital punishment, parole board discretion, and the limits of human redemption is constantly shaped by the shadows of cases like this one. McDuff represents the ultimate manifestation of a chilling reality within penology, the existence of individuals who are fundamentally beyond the reach of rehabilitation, whose capacity for cruelty is so absolute and ingrained that their reintegration into society represents an intolerable, catastrophic risk to the innocent. While modern justice systems must always strive to rehabilitate those who demonstrate genuine remorse and the capacity for change, the legacy of the broomstick killer serves as an unshakable reminder that the primary, non-negotiable obligation of the state is the absolute protection of its law-abiding citizens. When that obligation is compromised by administrative shortcuts or systemic overcrowding, the consequences are measured in blood, transforming the justice system from a shield of the innocent into an inadvertent instrument of destruction that leaves a trail of devastation across generations. The cultural resonance of the case also left an indelible imprint on how society consumes and reflects upon true crime narratives, steering the genre away from sensationalism and toward a deeper, more empathetic engagement with systemic accountability and victim dignity. In the years following McDuff's execution in 1998, storytellers, journalists, and investigators recognized that the true power of such dark histories lies not in glorifying the perpetrator's actions, but in honoring the memory of those who perished and rigorously dissecting the institutional failures that allowed the tragedy to unfold. By stripping away the gloss of myth and focusing squarely on the facts, the legal battles, and the profound human impact, narratives like this serve an essential societal function. They act as a collective memory, ensuring that history is not easily sanitized and that the lessons painfully learned through tragedy continue to guide the decisions of future generations of lawmakers, judges, and law enforcement officers who hold the immense weight of public safety in their hands. Looking back from our current vantage point in the modern era, the story of Kenneth Allen McDuff remains one of the most sobering and cautionary chapters in the annals of American jurisprudence. It reminds us that justice is a delicate, human-made creation, inherently vulnerable to error, fatigue, and the pressures of bureaucracy, yet it is also a system capable of self-correction, growth, and eventual accountability. The execution chamber in Huntsville brought a definitive, physical end to his existence, but the legacy of his crimes continues to resonate through every reformed parole statute, every integrated law enforcement database, and every renewed commitment to protecting the vulnerable. The shadow he cast over Texas was immense and terrifying, but the light of vigilance, memory, and reform that rose in response has proven stronger, ensuring that his reign of terror remains an isolated monument to institutional failure rather than a recurring nightmare in the modern world. As we bring this 9th part of our comprehensive exploration to its close, we leave behind the courtroom galleries, the desolate dump sites, and the quiet rural roads of Rosebud, carrying with us the enduring memory of those who were lost. The 12 individuals whose stories we have traced across these pages deserve long, full, and beautiful lives, surrounded by the people who loved them. Though their futures were violently stolen by a relentless predator enabled by a broken system, their legacy lives on in the ongoing pursuit of a safer, more just world. We remember them not through the lens of their final, tragic moments, but through the vibrant potential of who they were and what they meant to the world. As we step back into the ordinary rhythm of our own daily lives, let us carry forward the vital reminder that safety is a shared responsibility, that institutions must forever remain vigilant in their duty to protect, and that the memories of the innocent must always be preserved as a sacred, guiding light against the creeping darkness of the world. As we arrive at the absolute final frontier of this profound and harrowing journey through the dark annals of true crime and institutional failure, we find ourselves standing in the quiet aftermath of history. The story of Kenneth Allen McDuff has unfurled across these chapters not merely as an isolated account of unimaginable violence, but as a sweeping exploration of how fragile our societal structures truly are when tested by the darkest elements of human nature. We have traversed the decades from the sun-drenched rural quiet of Rosebud in 1966 to the sprawling, asphalt-laced highway networks of the early 90s, tracing every step of a tragedy that was enabled not just by a monster, but by the systemic cracks of the very legal apparatus designed to protect the innocent. This final reflection demands that we look beyond the courtroom drama, the execution chamber, and the cold statistics of crime ledgers, and instead focus deeply on the enduring philosophical and human truths that remain long after the noise has faded away, reminding us forever of the heavy price paid when the systems entrusted with our protection experience catastrophic administrative collapse. The core of this narrative has never truly belonged to the perpetrator, regardless of how notorious or terrifying his legacy became in the history of American jurisprudence. To grant a predator the central focus of our memory is to misunderstand the very nature of true accountability and historical integrity. Instead, the emotional and moral center of gravity rests entirely with the 12 individuals whose lives were violently erased by a man who should never have been allowed to walk free among the public. From the 3 young teenagers whose youthful dreams were abruptly shattered on a lonely Texas road during the 1960s, to the 9 women whose vibrant modern lives were systematically terminated during the terror of the early 90s. These individuals represented a universe of unfulfilled potential, creativity, love, and community contribution. Their families were forced to navigate an ocean of grief compounded by the horrifying realization that their losses were entirely preventable, born from a bureaucratic compromise that traded public safety for administrative convenience. Their resilience, their tireless advocacy, and their refusal to let the state quietly sweep its catastrophic mistakes under the rug stand as the true moral anchor of this entire historical chapter, ensuring that the victims would never be forgotten and their names remain permanently embedded into the collective conscience of a nation. When we contemplate the systemic failures that permitted Kenneth McDuff to resume his campaign of terror following his 1989 parole release, we are forced to confront the uncomfortable realities of how institutions manage risk and authority. The penal system is built upon a delicate, ongoing tension between the ideals of rehabilitation and the absolute necessity of public protection. While modern society must always strive to offer pathways of redemption for those capable of change, the case of the broomstick killer serves as an unshakable, haunting reminder that there are individuals whose capacity for absolute cruelty is so ingrained that their reintegration into human society represents an intolerable and catastrophic risk. The administrative decision to release a condemned capital murderer was an institutional catastrophe of historic proportions, proving beyond any shadow of a doubt that when bureaucratic expedience overrides the fundamental duty of safeguarding the public, the consequences are measured not in abstract policy debates, but in real human blood. The reforms, legislative overhauls, and structural changes that emerged in the wake of this disaster became vital monuments to progress, ensuring that future generations of law enforcement officials and parole boards would operate with a heightened, uncompromising awareness of the high stakes involved in their decisions and the absolute gravity of their official duties. The true crime genre itself has undergone a profound evolution in the wake of such tragedies, shifting away from the sensationalized mythology of serial killers toward a much deeper, more empathetic engagement with systemic accountability and victim dignity. Storytellers, journalists, and investigators have increasingly recognized that the true power of dark historical narratives does not lie in glorifying the dark exploits of perpetrators, but in honoring the memory of those who perished and rigorously dissecting the institutional failures that allowed the tragedies to unfold in the first place. By stripping away the gloss of myth and focusing squarely on the cold facts, the complex legal battles, and the profound human impact, narratives like this serve an essential societal function. They act as a collective memory, ensuring that history is not easily sanitized and that the lessons painfully learned through tragedy continue to guide the decisions of future generations of lawmakers, judges, and law enforcement officers who hold the immense weight of public safety in their hands. This ongoing cultural shift ensures that the voices of the fallen remain front and center, transforming their tragic fates into a permanent force for positive institutional change, public vigilance, and enduring legal reform across the entire judicial landscape. Looking back from our current vantage point in the modern era, the story of Kenneth Allen McDuff remains one of the most sobering and cautionary chapters in the annals of American history. It reminds us that justice is a delicate, human-made creation, inherently vulnerable to error, fatigue, and the pressures of bureaucracy, yet it is also a system capable of self-correction, growth, and eventual accountability. The execution chamber in Huntsville brought a definitive, physical end to his existence in 1998, closing the final physical chapter of his horrifying existence. But the legacy of his crimes continues to resonate through every reformed parole statute, every integrated law enforcement database, and every renewed commitment to protecting the vulnerable from predatory violence. The shadow he cast over Texas was immense and terrifying, but the light of vigilance, memory, and reform that rose in response has proven stronger, ensuring that his reign of terror remains an isolated monument to institutional failure rather than a recurring nightmare in the modern world. A permanent reminder of what happens when the machinery of justice falters and society demands absolute correction. As we bring this extensive, 10-part exploration to its definitive close, we leave behind the courtroom galleries, the desolate dump sites, and the quiet rural roads of Rosebud, carrying with us the enduring memory of those who were lost. The 12 individuals whose stories we have traced across these pages deserved long, full, and beautiful lives, surrounded by the people who loved them and supported their dreams. Though their futures were violently stolen by a relentless predator enabled by a broken system, their legacy lives on in the ongoing pursuit of a safer, more just world. We remember them not through the lens of their final, tragic moments, but through the vibrant potential of who they were and what they meant to the world around them. As we step back into the ordinary rhythm of our own daily lives, let us carry forward the vital reminder that safety is a shared responsibility, that institutions must forever remain vigilant in their duty to protect, and that the memories of the innocent must always be preserved as a sacred, guiding light against the creeping darkness of the world. The philosophy of justice ultimately rests upon the premise that society can learn from its darkest failures and build stronger barriers against future catastrophes. The journey through the McDuff case has been a grueling test of our capacity to confront institutional negligence and human malice without losing our commitment to fairness, truth, and accountability. Every legal statute that was rewritten, every parole guideline that was tightened, and every interagency partnership that was forged stands as a testament to the collective refusal of society to let those deaths be in vain. The historical archive of this case is heavy with sorrow, but it is equally rich with the enduring strength of families who refused to be silenced and investigators who pursued the truth with unyielding dedication. Their combined efforts ensured that the darkest moments of the past would transform into a powerful catalyst for a more protective, watchful future that honors the victims through meaningful, permanent legal evolution. We must therefore carry these profound lessons forward into our daily lives, recognizing that the constant vigilance required to preserve our safety and our shared values is an ongoing obligation that never truly rests. The true measure of a civilized society is not found in how easily it forgets its deepest tragedies, but in how deeply it honors its innocent victims and how fiercely it reforms its legal institutions to prevent history from ever repeating itself. As the final echoes of this dark chronicle fade into the quiet background of our modern world, let the names and eternal memories of the 12 individuals whose lives were so cruelly stolen remain vividly alive in our collective awareness forever. They are the true heart of this narrative, the eternal symbols of our shared humanity, and the guiding lights that compel us forever forward toward a world defined by unyielding justice, deep compassion, and absolute protection for every single person who dwells within it. As we navigate past the immediate historical boundaries and legal aftermath of the Kenneth McDuff case, we find ourselves peering into the broader, unending horizon of societal vigilance. The echoes of such catastrophic institutional failures do not fade into silence with the execution of a single criminal. Instead, they transform into a permanent, guiding frequency that underpins the entire philosophy of modern criminal justice. When we look back at the dark path forged by the broomstick killer, we are reminded that the architecture of safety is constantly being tested by the shifting weights of bureaucracy, public policy, and human nature. The legacy of these events serves as an eternal reminder that the price of an orderly, protected society is an unyielding, hypervigilant awareness from every tier of governance, law enforcement, and civic participation. We are compelled to recognize that the systems we rely upon are inherently human, and therefore susceptible to the very flaws and oversights that allowed a documented monster to slip back through the administrative doors of the penal system in 1989. This profound realization has permanently altered the DNA of correctional administration across the United States. The paradigm shifted from an over-reliance on institutional metrics and administrative expediency toward an uncompromising focus on historical risk profiling, deep psychological evaluation, and rigorous public safety prioritization. Parole boards, once cloaked in bureaucratic opacity and pressured by the crushing demands of overcrowded cell blocks, were subjected to intense legislative oversight and structural overhauls designed to eliminate the dangerous loopholes that granted McDuff his freedom. The modern correctional landscape operates under a sobering understanding that a violent offender's path to release cannot be greased by administrative convenience or superficial compliance metrics. Every file review, every parole hearing, and every sentencing guideline is now measured against the heavy, haunting backdrop of history, ensuring that the devastating mistakes of the past are never casually repeated. The institutional framework of Texas and jurisdictions nationwide was forged anew in the crucible of this tragedy, establishing a resilient barrier that prioritizes the absolute protection of the innocent above all competing administrative pressures. Parallel to these administrative transformations, the landscape of criminal investigation underwent its own radical evolution, particularly in the realm of interagency cooperation and intelligence sharing. During the early 90s, when women were disappearing across diverse counties and municipal borders in Texas, the fragmented nature of local policing initially acted as a blindfold, allowing a mobile predator to exploit jurisdictional gaps with chilling impunity. The agonizing realization that these isolated missing persons cases were part of a unified, statewide rampage catalyzed a revolution in how law enforcement agencies communicate and collaborate. Regional task forces, cross-jurisdictional databases, and integrated intelligence networks became the gold standard of modern policing, ensuring that contemporary predators can no longer hide in the bureaucratic spaces between adjacent police departments or county sheriff offices. The blood of McDuff's victims helped pave the way for a technologically and operationally unified law enforcement community, one equipped with the tools necessary to track, connect, and neutralize serial threats long before they can amass a devastating body count. Beyond the structural and operational reforms, the cultural consumption of true crime narratives experienced a profound maturation, shifting away from the sensationalized mythology of serial killers toward a deeper, more empathetic engagement with systemic accountability and victim dignity. In the decades following McDuff's execution in 1998, storytellers, investigative journalists, and documentarians increasingly recognize that the true power of dark historical accounts lies not in glorifying the grotesque exploits of perpetrators, but in honoring the memory of those who perished and rigorously dissecting the institutional failures that permitted the tragedies to unfold. By stripping away the gloss of myth and focusing squarely on the cold facts, the complex legal battles, and the profound human impact, narratives like this serve an essential societal function. They act as a collective memory, ensuring that history is not easily sanitized and that the lessons painfully learned through tragedy continue to guide the decisions of future generations of lawmakers, judges, and law enforcement officers who hold the immense weight of public safety in their hands. This ongoing cultural shift ensures that the voices of the fallen remain front and center, transforming their tragic fates into a permanent force for positive institutional change, public vigilance, and enduring legal reform across the entire judicial landscape. The philosophical debate surrounding penology, rehabilitation, and the limits of human redemption is constantly shaped by the haunting shadows of cases like this one. Macduff represents the ultimate manifestation of a chilling reality within the study of criminal behavior: the existence of individuals who are fundamentally beyond the reach of rehabilitation, whose capacity for cruelty is so absolute and ingrained that their reintegration into society represents an intolerable, catastrophic risk to the innocent. While modern justice systems must always strive to rehabilitate those who demonstrate genuine remorse and the capacity for change, the legacy of the broomstick killer serves as an unshakable reminder that the primary, non-negotiable obligation of the state is the absolute protection of its law-abiding citizens. When that obligation is compromised by administrative shortcuts or systemic overcrowding, the consequences are measured in blood, transforming the justice system from a shield of the innocent into an inadvertent instrument of destruction that leaves a trail of devastation across generations. Yet, amidst the complex machinery of legal reform and philosophical debate, the true emotional anchor of this entire historical narrative remains anchored in the unyielding endurance of the victims' families. The relatives of the 12 individuals whose lives were violently stolen carried an unbearable burden, navigating not only the unimaginable grief of their losses, but also the compounding outrage of realizing that those deaths were entirely preventable. Their tireless advocacy, their refusal to let the state quietly sweep its mistakes under the rug, and their transformation of private sorrow into a powerful crusade for systemic justice stand as the true moral cornerstone of this entire chapter. They ensured that the victims would never be forgotten, that their names remain permanently embedded into the collective conscience of a nation, and that the legal system would be held accountable for its failures. Their courage in the face of unspeakable tragedy reminds us that human resilience can rise from the deepest ashes of despair, forging light out of the most profound darkness. As we trace the lineage of these events, we must ensure that our final thoughts return with absolute clarity to the 12 souls whose lives were cut short. From the 3 young teenagers in Rosebud whose youthful dreams were abruptly shattered in 1966, to the 9 women whose vibrant modern lives were systematically terminated during the terror of the early 90s. These individuals represented a universe of unfulfilled potential, creativity, love, and community contribution. Their stories remind us that behind every statistic in a true crime ledger lies a human soul, a daughter, a sister, a mother, a friend, whose absence left a permanent, bleeding void in the lives of those who loved them. We remember them not through the lens of their final, tragic moments, but through the vibrant potential of who they were and what they meant to the world around them, ensuring that their legacy lives on in the ongoing pursuit of a safer, more just world. Furthermore, the educational impact of this case within academic institutions and law enforcement training academies cannot be overstated, as future generations of legal scholars and investigators analyze the systemic vulnerabilities that allowed a condemned killer to walk free. Case studies built upon the Macduff disaster serve as mandatory curriculum elements, instilling in new recruits a healthy skepticism toward administrative shortcuts and a profound dedication to meticulous evidentiary documentation. The lessons learned from the failures of 1989 ensure that institutional memory remains sharp, guarding against the complacency that often creeps into bureaucratic environments over extended periods of calm. This continuous educational reinforcement acts as an invisible shield, ensuring that the hard-won insights derived from unimaginable tragedy are successfully transmitted across professional generations without losing their vital urgency. In bringing this comprehensive exploration to its definitive close, we leave behind the courtroom galleries, the desolate dump sites, and the quiet rural roads of Rosebud, carrying with us the enduring memory of those who were lost. The journey through the Macduff case has been a grueling test of our capacity to confront institutional negligence and human malice without losing our commitment to fairness, truth, and accountability. Every legal statute that was rewritten, every parole guideline that was tightened, and every interagency partnership that was forged stands as a testament to the collective refusal of society to let those deaths be in vain. As the final echoes of this dark chronicle fade into the quiet background of our modern world, let the names and eternal memories of the 12 individuals whose lives were so cruelly stolen remain vividly alive in our collective awareness forever. They are the true heart of this narrative, the eternal symbols of our shared humanity, and the guiding lights that compel us forever forward toward a world defined by unyielding justice, deep compassion, and absolute protection for every single person who dwells within it, reminding us eternally that true justice requires unwavering vigilance, moral courage, and an absolute commitment to ensuring that no innocent life is ever again sacrificed on the altar of administrative indifference. As we arrive at the ultimate boundary of this profound, multi-layered chronicle regarding the life, crimes, and systemic failures surrounding Kenneth Allen McDuff, we find ourselves standing in a space of quiet, reflective finality. The journey we have undertaken across these chapters has not been merely an exercise in recounting the dark details of gruesome violence, but rather an extensive, searching exploration of the delicate architecture of civil society and the immense human cost paid when that architecture collapses under the weight of administrative oversight. We have walked the dusty rural roads of Rosebud in 1966, witnessed the chilling dawn of an unprecedented criminal career, traced the devastating legal loopholes and prison overcrowding crises that birthed the catastrophic parole release of 1989, and relived the statewide terror of his second reign of slaughter that ultimately ended inside the execution chamber in Huntsville in 1998. Through every phase of this harrowing narrative, we have confronted the uncomfortable, sobering truth that the greatest dangers often reside not just in the dark impulses of predatory individuals, but in the institutional fatigue and complacency that allow those predators to slip through the cracks of a trusting society. The legacy of the broomstick killer stands as an eternal monument to these harsh realities, a permanent warning sign etched into the history books of American jurisprudence, reminding us forever that the preservation of safety requires an unyielding, hypervigilant commitment from every level of governance, law enforcement, and civic participation, ensuring that the foundational promise of state protection is never again compromised by bureaucratic convenience or procedural oversight. The profound structural evolution that swept through the legal and penal systems of Texas and jurisdictions nationwide in the aftermath of this disaster serves as a vital testament to the capacity for institutional self-correction. The catastrophic decision to release a condemned capital murderer back into an unsuspecting public exposed the fatal flaws of a correctional philosophy that prioritized administrative metrics and bed capacity over rigorous risk assessment and public safety. In response to the public outrage and the agonizing realization of preventable loss, lawmakers, penal administrators, and legal scholars banded together to rewrite the rules governing parole, sentencing, and offender management. The era of casual or automated parole consideration for violent criminals was decisively brought to an end, replaced by a cautious, highly restrictive framework that mandated comprehensive psychological evaluations, historical risk profiling, and explicit consideration of the severity of original offenses before any violent offender could even be considered for release. Furthermore, the operational isolation that initially hampered local police departments during the early 90s was systematically dismantled through the creation of integrated regional task forces, cross-jurisdictional intelligence databases, and collaborative statewide networks designed to ensure that modern predators can no longer exploit the bureaucratic boundaries between neighboring municipalities. These sweeping reforms transformed the American law enforcement and correctional apparatus, forging a much sharper, more resilient shield to protect the innocent from the dark forces that operate in the margins of modern civilization. Yet, while legislative overhauls and structural modernizations are essential monuments to progress, they can never fully balance the ledger of such profound human tragedy. The true heart of this narrative has never resided within the cold mechanics of courtroom arguments, the clinical protocols of execution chambers, or the intricate text of reformed legal statutes. It belongs entirely and unequivocally to the victims whose lives were so cruelly extinguished. From the 3 young teenagers in Rosebud whose bright futures were violently truncated on a quiet night in 1966, to the 9 women whose complex, vibrant modern lives were systematically eradicated during the terror of the early 90s. 12 distinct universes of potential were permanently erased by an individual completely devoid of human empathy. Their stories remind us that behind every statistic in a true crime ledger lies a human soul, a daughter, a sister, a mother, a friend, whose absence left a permanent, bleeding void in the lives of those who loved them. The families of these victims carried an unbearable burden, navigating not only the unimaginable grief of their losses, but also the compounding outrage of realizing that those deaths were entirely preventable. Their tireless advocacy, their refusal to let the state quietly sweep its administrative mistakes under the rug, and their transformation of private sorrow into a powerful crusade for systemic justice stand as the true moral cornerstone of this entire chapter, ensuring that the victims would never be forgotten, that their names remain permanently embedded into the collective conscience of a nation, and that the legal system would be held accountable for its profound failures. The philosophical debate surrounding penology, rehabilitation, and the limits of human redemption is constantly shaped by the haunting shadows of cases like this one. Kenneth McDuff represents the ultimate manifestation of a chilling reality within the study of criminal behavior, the existence of individuals who are fundamentally beyond the reach of rehabilitation, whose capacity for cruelty is so absolute and ingrained that their reintegration into society represents an intolerable, catastrophic risk to the innocent. While modern justice systems must always strive to rehabilitate those who demonstrate genuine remorse and the capacity for change, the legacy of the broomstick killer serves as an unshakable reminder that the primary, non-negotiable obligation of the state is the absolute protection of its law-abiding citizens. When that obligation is compromised by administrative shortcuts or systemic overcrowding, the consequences are measured in blood, transforming the justice system from a shield of the innocent into an inadvertent instrument of destruction that leaves a trail of devastation across generations. This eternal tension forces every generation of legal practitioners to balance compassion with caution, ensuring that the pursuit of humane treatment never eclipses the fundamental duty to secure the public against unrepentant predators who view human life as entirely disposable. The cultural resonance of the true crime genre has also matured significantly in the wake of such dark historical accounts, shifting away from sensationalized mythology and toward a deeper, more empathetic engagement with systemic accountability and victim dignity. Storytellers, investigative journalists, and documentarians have increasingly recognized that the true power of dark historical narratives does not lie in glorifying the grotesque exploits of perpetrators, but in honoring the memory of those who perished and rigorously dissecting the institutional failures that permitted the tragedies to unfold in the first place. By stripping away the gloss of myth and focusing squarely on the cold facts, the complex legal battles, and the profound human impact, narratives like this serve an essential societal function. They act as a collective memory, ensuring that history is not easily sanitized and that the lessons painfully learned through tragedy continue to guide the decisions of future generations of lawmakers, judges, and law enforcement officers who hold the immense weight of public safety in their hands. This ongoing cultural shift ensures that the voices of the fallen remain front and center, transforming their tragic fates into a permanent force for positive institutional change, public vigilance, and enduring legal reform across the entire judicial landscape. As we bring this comprehensive, 12-part exploration to its definitive close, we step back from the courtroom galleries, the desolate dump sites, and the quiet rural roads of Rosebud, carrying with us the enduring memory of those who were lost. The journey through the McDuff case has been a grueling test of our capacity to confront institutional negligence and human malice without losing our commitment to fairness, truth, and accountability. Every legal statute that was rewritten, every parole guideline that was tightened, and every interagency partnership that was forged stands as a testament to the collective refusal of society to let those deaths be in vain. As the final echoes of this dark chronicle fade into the quiet background of our modern world, let the names and eternal memories of the 12 individuals whose lives were so cruelly stolen remain vividly alive in our collective awareness forever. They are the true heart of this narrative, the eternal symbols of our shared humanity, and the guiding lights that compel us forever forward toward a world defined by unyielding justice, deep compassion, and absolute protection for every single person who dwells within it, reminding us eternally that true justice requires unwavering vigilance, moral courage, and an absolute commitment to ensuring that no innocent life is ever again sacrificed on the altar of administrative indifference. The ultimate legacy of this haunting chronicle resides in the profound understanding that a civilized society is measured entirely by how fiercely it protects its most vulnerable members and how honestly it confronts its most grievous institutional failures. We must never allow the passage of time to dilute the horror of what occurred, nor permit the comforts of modern security to breed a dangerous complacency within our civic institutions. The memory of Kenneth Allen McDuff and his victims remains a permanent anchor, pulling us back whenever the currents of bureaucracy threaten to drift toward oversight and neglect. Let us carry this solemn awareness forward as we navigate our own lives, ensuring that our communities remain places where safety is not merely hoped for, but actively defended through eternal vigilance, moral clarity, and an unshakable dedication to the truth. Though the courtroom lights have dimmed and the archives are securely closed, the human spirit that rose from the ashes of this tragedy endures, promising that justice, remembrance, and compassion will forever stand as our strongest defenses against the creeping darkness of the world forevermore, protecting every single individual who walks beneath the open sky with enduring grace and peace.